Okay, now that we worked with session, this video is going to cover cookies. So remember, session is a state on the server. So each user that logs in has a session or anonymous user, and that gives them a unique session ID. And then that session ID is then persisted, and every time a request or a response is made, the header uh, gives them that session ID depending on if it's a request or a response shape or object. And then with that session ID, it looks up their session and gets all the information related to that session. But once the downfall with a session is once you log out or close your browser or leave the website, then your session is gone. So uh, any favorite teams that you might have had in your session is then gone. You log back in or you sign back onto the website and you have to do it all over again. So one way to get around that, or one way to fix that, if you don't have a user that's logged in and you save all the information in a database, or you don't persist it in some way, is with a cookie. So uh, usually you'd use a database for maybe this sort of application. But if it's more of settings or something for a particular website, you log into a website and they say, would you like this website to use your location to maybe target some ads to you or whatever the case is. And then when you say yes or no, it probably sets a cookie on your computer from that website that tells it the setting that you had. So, hey, user X got on my website 10 days ago and they said we were allowed to use their location, so now we're not going to ask them again because that cookie exists. And then you go ahead and set that cookie to expire maybe in 30 days or 45 or 60. And then when the next time you log in, maybe 3 months from then, let's say you logged in 3 months after that, and then they say, okay, we found the cookie. It says we're allowed to use their location for this website, but the cookie expired, so we're going to have to delete the cookie and ask them again. So cookies are a way to have a physical file on the user's local machine, the user that has the browser, the client, to get some information from that user, be it options for a website, permission to do something. In this case, we're going to save our favorite teams down to a cookie. That way we can, even if we log out or close the application, that cookie will still persist on our local machine and actually still have our teams. So let's go ahead and look at the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint, I believe, if you go scroll down, after you cover everything about a session, the last 8 slides or so covers cookies. So you can see there's a cookies options class provided that you can set some of the options for your cookie. We already talked about the expiration date of a cookie. So maybe you can say it expires in 30 days. So you can see here, code that sets a persistent cookie. You have var options equals new cookie options. And then you have expires equals date time dot now dot add days 30. So it'll take the date time of now. It'll take that timestamp. So maybe it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the 14th, like it is now. So then it'll go 30 days from that, which will probably be the 13th or 14th of November at 1 o'clock, and set the expiration date. And you can also see we have response.cookies.append username, Grace, so this person's username is Grace, and there's the options attached to that cookie. So there's a couple different types of cookie classes we can work with. So you can see that 2 properties of the controller class is a request and a response. So depending on what we're working with, we're going to need to use the request or the response object. So there's a differentiation, and it's important because one sets a cookie on the local machine and one reads a cookie from the local machine. So here's code that sets a cookie. So whenever you want to set a cookie, you need to respond because the server is responding to the client. So here I want to send a cookie to the client. I'm going to send it as a response object, and I'm going to append username Grace. Whereas if I want to get information off of a cookie from the client, that's a request because the client is making a request to the server, so that's the request cookies, and they're trying to get the username from that cookie to maybe auto-populate or something on the website. Maybe they already know their name is Grace because they've been to that website before and they don't need to ask again. So now let's go back to our website here, and we're going to do the same thing that we did last time. We're going to have like a little helper class that's going to encapsulate all of the method calls we're going to use for our cookies into a nice little class. That way we can just abstract away a little bit the complexity of working with cookies. So I'm going to go to my models folder here and add a new file. And that file will be nflcookies.cs. So it's a CS file. Go ahead and set a namespace of nflteams.models. And then the class will be public class NFL cookies. So the first thing we're going to need is a key again for this cookie, and I'm going to go ahead and say private constant string my teams equals my teams. Okay. And then since we're going to work with this class both for request and response objects, let's go ahead and put that on our class. So private I request cookie collection. So the cookie collection that is on the user's machine, request cookies, and go ahead and do a getter and a setter for it. Let's do a little better formatting here. Let's go ahead and add the using namespace for the Microsoft ASP.NET Core HTTP that has the cookies in it. And let's also add another property, or I guess field, for the response cookies. Response cookies, and a couple getters and setters for it. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a couple constructors to pass in whether or not we're working with a request or a response object whenever we new up this class of NFL cookies. So let's go ahead and create one constructor. Let's just click up here and make our lives a little bit easier. Generate constructor. Yeah, that's fine. I'll just copy and paste this over again. Okay. Let's use this constructor to be our request cookies. I request cookie collection cookies, and I response cookies. Now let's set our request cookies equal to that so our controllers can pass in the request or the response cookies like so, and the same thing with our response. Okay, so now we can pass in whether we're trying to get cookies off of the client or whether we're trying to append cookies or send cookies back to the browser. So now we want to be able to set those cookies and get those cookies and remove them. So let's go ahead and create a method for set, public void set. And what we're going to be using are the teams IDs for our favorite teams. So that's probably the easiest piece of information. They're all unique. So I'm going to say set my team IDs. And then let's pass in the list of team. So first I'll need to include the list using statement. And I'm already in models, so I won't need to include models. So I can say list of team, my teams. And now I have a method to set the cookie. So this, since I'm setting it, since I'm sending the cookie or responding to the cookie or sending the cookie back to the browser, I'm going to be working with the response cookies. So the first thing I need are the IDs I'm working with. So what IDs do I have for my favorite teams? So I already got past my teams here, so let's use link to select all of the IDs out of this collection. So I can say var IDs equals, so I need to use my teams. I'm going to go ahead and do .select, and since I don't currently have system.link, I'll need to include it. So go ahead and use system.link. And you can see I added system.link to the top here now. And I can select all of the IDs from my collection. So I can say for every single team I'm going to call T, I want to get the team.team ID. Okay, so now I have all of those team IDs in a collection, so I'm going to go ahead and cast that to a list. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of those inside of one single string. So instead of having a list of string, what I want to do is just have one whole string. That way I can set a cookie to those IDs. So what I'm going to do is set some sort of delimiter. So I want to be able to differentiate one string from another. So I'm going to set a delimiter here. And the delimiter is going to be a dash. So let's go ahead and say private const string delimiter. And I'm going to use a dash. Alright, so now coming back down, I have my IDs as a list, and if you hover over IDs, sure enough, a list of string. So now I want to have one single string from a list of string. So I'm going to have var ID string equals string.join. I'm going to use the join method. So if you hover over join, you can see that it takes in your object here and returns back a string. So the object I want to give it, I guess the first thing it actually needs is the separator. So you can see it takes a separator, which is a character. I want to pass it delimiter. And I need to pass it the collection now. You can see IEnumerable of string values, which is my IDs. Okay, so now that returned back a string. So I now have a string of all of my team IDs. Let's go ahead and say, let's make some cookie options because I want my cookies to expire. Equals new cookie options. Go ahead and use an object initializer. And I'm going to say expires date time. And I'll probably need to add in the using statement for date time. .now.add days 30. So let's go ahead and add in this using statement. Alright, so now I have some options for my cookie I'm about to set. Let's go ahead and remove, I'll need to have something here to remove my old team IDs in case they added a new team to their favorites. So I'm going to make a method called remove team IDs eventually. And then I can do response cookies dot append, and the key, if we remember, will be my teams. The value will be my string of IDs, and I'm going to also give it the options so it knows when to expire. Let's go ahead and write the method to remove the old team IDs. So it should reach out to the client and remove the old cookie. So I'm going to say response because I'm reaching out to the client. So response cookies dot delete. I'm going to give it the key. So if you look here, delete string key. So what key belongs to the cookie you want to delete? And that is my teams. Alright, so now we can set team IDs with the cookie. Now we need to be able to get the IDs for our favorite teams. Remember, here we have a list of strings, so we're going to return back the same types. I'm going to say IEnumerable of string. We're going to return back I'm going to make it public. Get my team IDs. So now we're no longer working with the response cookies. Now we should be working with the request cookie. So I'm going to say var cookie equals request cookies, and then we're going to use the key syntax almost as if this were a dictionary and say my teams. So that's the key of the cookie that I want to get from their user, the user's local machine. And then if I find one, so maybe they've never been to my website before. So let's first make sure that I found one. So make sure that string is null or empty cookie. So if the string is, if the cookie is empty, then I want to do something. So I'm going to go ahead and return new list of strings. So essentially an empty list. Otherwise, it's not empty. I can return. I'm going to probably format this a little better. I return string dot is null or empty cookie new list of string. Otherwise, let's see if it's going to let me do this first. Okay, it looks like it. So return first, we're going to use a ternary. Is the string null or empty? So is the cookie empty that gets returned? You can see cookie is in fact a string. So it'll go get the cookie and then return back the string, essentially the value that's in the cookie. So if it's empty, return back a new list of string. Otherwise, we want to get those IDs from it. So I'm going to use the string.split method to split those back into a list of string. And it looks like this actually returns a primitive array, so I'm just going to go ahead and return string.split. I might not need to. Let's give it the delimiter. Okay. And then I might be able to cast it .toList. Okay. So if the cookie exists, if the cookie does not exist, so it's empty, return back an empty list of string. Otherwise, split my list of strings by a dash and then return it as a list here. Okay. So let's go ahead and go back to our controller. Home controller. And now, if they have a cookie, I want to get it. That way I can figure out their favorite teams when they come to the website for the first time. So the first thing I want to do is see if they have a session. Okay. So before we fill out the model here, I'm going to say int count equals session.get my team count. Okay. Now this returns back an int, but what I want, I'm going to go back to my NFL session, get my team count, and instead return null if I don't find it. So if there is no team count, I'm going to go ahead and do this. So if there is no team count, return null instead of 0. That way I can check for null over here if there is in fact no team count. So int count, so it could possibly be null if this user doesn't have a session. So now I can say if the count equals null, so the user does not have a session, then I can try to see if they have a cookie. So if they have a session, I don't really need to figure out if they have a cookie. But if they don't have a session, then maybe I'll try to figure out if they have a cookie. So I can try to get the cookies from the browser. So let's go ahead and say new NFL cookies. And I'm going to send the request cookies because I'm trying to get them from the browser. And then I'm going to get var IDs equals cookies dot get my team IDs. So if they don't have a cookie, try to see if they have a cookie, and I'll cast that to a list, .toList. Okay. So now that I have the team's IDs, let's go ahead and try to set their favorite teams here. So let's go ahead and say var teams equals new list of team. And then let's try to see if I got any teams back. So if there is any teams in that cookie, so if there are any IDs, so if IDs dot any so now I can say my teams, I guess just teams, equals, so I'm going to get the teams from my database, .teams.include, so I need to include all that information for the conference. .include division .where, so I only want the teams where the IDs that I have for their favorites contains each team ID. So I want to figure out where those lists essentially intersect. Okay, so then I can do that, and then I'm going to add those teams to my session. Set my teams, teams. So if they have a session, use it. Otherwise, get their session from the cookie and use that. Now the last thing I need to do is every time they add or delete their favorite teams, I need to update that as well. So here's their add. So here's their teams. There, I'm going to set their teams in the session. So after I set their teams in the session, I'm going to go ahead and create a new cookie, or at least update the cookie with their new favorite teams. Equals new NFL cookies. And it's going to be response.cookies because I'm going to be sending the new cookie to the browser. And cookies.set my team IDs for the new teams. Okay, so now I'm saving that to a cookie. And the last thing I need to do is the delete that I believe is on the favorites controller. So here's delete. Here I'm removing the teams from the session. So let's go ahead and open up a new cookies object here, NFL cookies, HTTP or I'm sorry, response cookies. So I want to send a new cookie to the browser. I'm going to say cookies dot remove should be remove my team IDs, but I must have never made the method. So let's go say remove my team IDs, and I'll go ahead and say generate method here, and then go to NFL cookies. Okay. So remember, I'm working with, let's see, cookies.remove my team IDs. I'm working with response cookies. So going back here, I can say response cookies dot delete, and I'm going to pass it maybe I did already have a remove my team IDs. I just made it private. Let's go make this public. So that should fix that. Remove my team IDs. Why doesn't it like that? Cookies dot remove my team IDs. Okay. So let's go ahead and test this out. All right, so I have one favorite team in my session. So when I need to figure out a way to remove my session. So let's go ahead and clear. Okay. I still don't know if this will work or not, so let me go ahead and exit out of my application here. Let's try to run it. What I might need to do is open in like an incognito window or something. So I don't have any favorite teams now. Let's go ahead and set one. Add to favorites. Let's go ahead and exit out. And try, let's try setting a breakpoint in our home controller. See what we get. Try to run it. I've hit a breakpoint. So let's see what count is. Let's F10. Count is null. Okay, so now it's going to try to read from my cookie. So since count is null, it's going to try to get their cookies from the browser. And it's going to get the IDs. And sure enough, it found an ID, or it found a cookie. And I don't know why this won't go away. And you can see a cookie has one string in it for my favorite team. So then if there are any cookies, get my favorite teams from the database, set those favorite teams in my session, and return it to the browser. And another way you can check to see that this worked is if you right-click on your web page and click Inspect, if you're trying to figure out if you successfully made a cookie. And then from there you can go to your Application tab. And then you have a lot of different things your application can do. So your cache storage, let's see, your session storage. You can go to your session here. And let me try to update this. Let's add to favorites. and I have a breakpoint, so let me get rid of the breakpoint and continue. I'd expect to see something here, but I don't see it. Okay, anyways, if you come down here to your cookies, now you can see all of the cookies that your website has put on your local machine. So you can see that I have my team's cookie and the value that's in it, and all of the different options that are included with that cookie. So if I shrink my screen a little bit here, you can see the domain, the path, and you can see when it expires, the size of the cookie, whether or not it's HTTP only, and everything else. So that's how you can tell whether or not it's making a cookie. That's how you use the request and response cookies in the ASP.NET Core ASP.NET Core ASP website, and I hope this helps you make cookies. So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.